Welcome everyone. I'm Dick Bateman, Chair of Membership at Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. Each year on the 23rd of April, William Shakespeare's birthday, we are delighted to hold a joint event with the famous Bath Shakespeare Society to celebrate the great man's works. This year the Society has organised a special reading of Shakespeare's sonnets, interspersed with information about some of his most well-known plays. So please welcome Dr. Peter Davies, Chair of Bath Shakespeare Society, to tell us more.
Thank you, Dick. And thanks to the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution for organising and hosting this celebration. And thank you, Dick, for referring to us as famous. I'm not sure that we deserve that, but very generous of you. On this day, we normally have a party with wine and cake. The cake is usually illustrated by an expert in cake illustration. And if you look at Susan's profile, you can see behind Susan the illustration of Richard III on the cake of that particular period, that particular year. But this year is different because of what Shakespeare would have referred to as the plague. The Bath Shakespeare Society has about 30 members. Our main activity is to read Shakespeare's plays. We cast them in advance, prepare and read them as well as we can. We make a point of reading all of them, even those which rarely get performed in the theatre. We don't have a star system. Everyone gets a chance to read a major role. This afternoon we're going to read 7 sonnets and the introductions to the 6 plays we have read in the past year. These will give you an idea of the sort of thing we discuss after the reading. Of course, all our activity since last March has been on Zoom. Like everyone else, we're looking forward to getting back to normal face-to-face meetings.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou ownest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee.
When my love swears that he is made of truth, I do believe him, though I know he lies, that he might think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's false subtleties, thus vainly thinking that he thinks me young, although he knows my days are past the best. Simply I credit his false-speaking tongue. On both sides thus is simple truth suppressed. But wherefore says he not that he is unjust? And wherefore say not I that I am old? Love's best habit is in seeming trust, and age in love loves not to have years told. Therefore I lie with him, and he with me, and in our thoughts by lies we flattered be.
King Lear. There are interesting parallels between the time of Shakespeare's writing of King Lear and our present era. Firstly, there was lockdown. The theatres were closed because of the plague, a not infrequent occurrence in those days. So it is thought Shakespeare took the opportunity to produce another of his great tragedies, some think also the bleakest. Secondly, when we look at the date of the first performance, December the 26th, 1606, at the court of King James I, we remember November the 5th of 1605, a year earlier. The terrorist plot, which had been driven by religious zealotry, had almost succeeded in blowing up the House of Lords, together with James and his family. From the amount of gunpowder discovered in the vaults below, it would have been a big bang. Thirdly, after he'd been installed as rightful King of England on the death of Elizabeth in 1603, and being from infancy also James VI of Scotland, the king strongly desired that the two nations should be united. However, not everyone was in agreement with this policy, with anti-union factions both at court and over the border. Sound familiar? So there was plague, terrorism, and a resistance to a united kingdom. We never know what Shakespeare truly thought, but he did like to keep in with his patrons. So he may have chosen the story of King Lear dividing the kingdom among his three daughters to be taken as a warning to those who thought to keep James's kingdom divided. However, in Holinshed's Chronicles, and in a play popular at the time about the legendary king of ancient Britain, who took it into his head to divide up his territory, the endings are contrived to be happy ones. Not so Shakespeare's Lear, where the war-torn kingdom falls apart and most of the protagonists lie dead. James may or may not have heeded the warnings, but he may have noticed that Lear's daughters' husbands bore the same titles as the young Stuart princes, Henry, Duke of Cornwall, and Charles, Duke of Albany. The play also deals with the fall of a tyrant and the self-indulgent misuse of power, such as that shown by Lear in the first act. The tale of King Lear may have been familiar to theatre-going Londoners, but Shakespeare adds to the already complex story by introducing Gloucester's scheming, viperous, smooth-tongued son Edmund, thereby offering a parallel example of dysfunctional family life. If Lear is blind to the insincerity of his two elder daughters' declarations of love and the younger one's honesty, then Gloucester is no less impervious to the qualities of his two sons. Lear, the egotistical autocrat, is cast out into the storm by his two elder daughters, his rage giving way to madness. Gloucester's lack of insight leads to the horrific spectacle of his being blinded on stage. With Cordelia's return and the division of the kingdom, the carnage goes on. Only Edgar, the good son, with Kent and Albany, is left alive on stage to arrange the disposal of the bodies. During its performance, King Lear has reflected the public's acceptance or rejection of the hopelessness and nihilism displayed. By the time the theatres were restored under Charles II, public taste was demanding something more optimistic. In 1681, Nahum Tate provided a new, improved version, where Lear lives on in happy retirement and Cordelia survives to marry Edgar. The Romantics were more receptive, enjoying the strong emotions, the overwhelming power of nature, and the delicious terrors of the original text. By the 20th century, with its own horrors, the play has been accepted with all its bitterness and pessimism, and has been a major influence on modern drama. Which would you prefer? A toned-down, less tragic version with a glimmer of hope at the end, or the full-on misery and despair of our modern versions?
Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment. Love is not love, which alters when its alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, and no man ever loved.
Julius Caesar. In tragedy, violence begets violence, and evil leads to further evil. This is true of Shakespeare's political tragedy, Julius Caesar. The story, well known in Shakespeare's time, was the subject of at least one previous play. Its main source was Plutarch's Lives of Julius Caesar, Antony, and Brutus. And, as usual, Shakespeare manipulated his source to serve his plot and his presentation of character. The play has aroused mixed feelings. Coleridge found it dull, and despite its rhetorical eloquence, it contains little of the poetry associated with the great tragedies. As in Macbeth, an evil deed is followed by greater evil. Caesar's murder led to a natural desire for revenge in his loyal friend Antony. But this is almost immediately followed by Antony's ambition for personal power. The political vacuum left by Caesar's death is quickly filled by the triumvirate of Antony, Octavius, and Lepidus, and their callous intention to kill anyone who might stand in their way exceeds any real or anticipated tyranny perpetrated by Caesar. Lepidus is contemptuously dismissed by the other two, and the dissension between Antony and Octavius already evident by Act 5. Civil war is inevitable, and the events consequent upon the murder happen much more rapidly than in Plutarch, increasing the sense of their inevitability. The play poses the question, is murder ever justified, especially on such dubious grounds as here? Its futility is immediately obvious when, at the end of the murder scene itself, another Caesar, Octavius, has already popped up in Rome, as if to replace the one assassinated. The conspirators may share in the murder, but their motives vary. Of the two main conspirators, Cassius, whose personal rancour against Caesar is plain, seems the more human. Like everyone else, he holds the famously virtuous Brutus in high esteem, wishing to enlist him to the conspiracy to elevate the intended murder. Shrewder than Brutus, he yet submits 3 times to Brutus's fatally inferior judgment, notably arguing that Antony should not be allowed to address the crowd. But each time he gives in, owing to admiration of a character he sees as morally superior to his own. Yet Cassius is the only conspirator not to accompany Caesar to the Senate, presumably because he cannot face the man he is about to kill. Brutus, the idealist, with no personal motive against Caesar, his close friend, finally, with faulty reasoning, decides to join the conspiracy. He compares Caesar to a serpent's egg, which at present not dangerous, when hatched certainly will be. Taking his analogy literally, he concludes that when Caesar is all-powerful, he will, without doubt, become a tyrant. Also, the murder is to be a sacrifice, not butchery. And later, Brutus really believes that the mob, seeing the blood-soaked assassins, will understand it to be a necessary sacrifice for the cause of peace, freedom, and liberty. He allows Antony to speak an oration after his own, with conditions which Antony makes eloquent use of. Ignorant of the way crowds react, he appeals in prose to their heads, whereas Antony, skillfully in verse, stirs their hearts to frenzy, using Caesar's mangled body as a persuasive visual aid. Brutus may have been the noblest Roman of them all, but he was certainly the least fitted to be a conspirator. Like Hamlet, though without the self-awareness, he is ill-equipped for the job. Hamlet and Julius Caesar were written within a year, and a comparison between the two men is interesting, both for different reasons struggling with the idea of murder. Why then do we warm to Hamlet but not to Brutus? One answer, I think, lies in Brutus' suppression of emotion, unwilling, like Hamlet, to unpack his heart with words. It is difficult to respond warmly to someone who conceals so much real feeling. Unlike Coleridge, I find Julius Caesar an absorbing play, dominated throughout by Caesar himself, despite his death in Act 3. Brutus and Cassius finally each recognize the inevitability of defeat, Cassius by omens on the way to Philippi, and Brutus by the appearance of Caesar's ghost. He acknowledges Caesar's controlling presence. O Julius Caesar, thou art mighty yet. Thy spirit walks abroad and turns our swords in our own proper entrails. And before his own death, Caesar, now be still. I killed not thee with half so good a will.
That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self, that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long.
Much Ado About Nothing is a play about third-party interference in matters of love. Two couples in very different relationships find themselves on the receiving end of much ado from the friends and foes around them. Matchmaking quickly becomes meddling as Don Pedro prepares to woo Hero himself on behalf of Claudio, and to bring Signor Benedick and Lady Beatrice into what he calls a mountain of affection. It's relevant to note that there are no requests for help from any of the lovers, and neither are there external impediments such as parental objection or mischievous fairies. With Claudio and Hero, it's quite simply love at first sight that eventually survives despite much onslaught. The relationship between Beatrice and Benedick is more interesting and more complicated. It's characterized by witty repartee and a will they, won't they element of uncertainty around a physical union. Benedick vows to be an eternal bachelor and, according to Beatrice, has many sworn brothers. He tells us he has no desire to hunt women. And Beatrice, for her part, is an arch skeptic of the love game, seemingly wanting nothing to do with it, and frightened of being shown up lest she, in her own words, should prove the mother of fools. But it's clear in the first lines of the play that Beatrice is interested in Benedick, and Benedick is clearly affected by Beatrice. He's very hurt, for example, when behind masks, Beatrice refers to him as the prince's jester, a very dull fool. They do finally agree to marry. However, they don't swear undying love to each other. And after discovering they may have been duped into accepting each other, and perhaps still fearful of committing themselves for whatever reason, the sparring continues. Benedick tells Beatrice, "I will have thee, but take thee for pity." And Beatrice says, "I yield upon much persuasion, partly to save your life." Finally, in the last scene of the play, they kiss. Many productions temper the sparring with affectionate body language and much merriment, so that this kiss appears passionate. But Shakespeare's text surrounding the kiss is, I think, unconvincing here. And it's worth noting that he did not call this play All's Well That Ends Well. Before kissing Beatrice, Benedick says, "Peace, I will stop your mouth." And immediately after, the audience is treated to Benedick's opinion on marriage, in which he makes no reference to Beatrice, the woman at his side, who has supposedly just set him on fire. And Shakespeare provides his audience with no further dialogue between the couple. So one is left wondering if there really has been a passionate resolution of love here. There's much in the text to contemplate internal impediments, such as questions over their sexuality and or fears of intimacy, impediments that would defy outside interference. Perhaps Shakespeare is seeking to preserve the question mark hanging over Beatrice and Benedick, rather than to dispel it. It would be in keeping with his title, but must also be his summary. In other words, both love affairs, problems or no, proceed along their own paths, regardless of outside interference.
How oft, when thou my music playest, upon that blessed wood, whose motion sounds with thy sweet fingers, when thou gently swayest the wiry concord that mine ear confounds, do I envy those jacks that nimble leap to kiss the tender inward of thy hand, whilst my poor lips, which should that harvest reap, at the wood's boldness by thee blushing stand? To be so tickled, they would change their state and situation with those dancing chips, o'er whom thy fingers walk with gentle gait, making dead wood more blessed than living lips. Since saucy jacks so happy are in this, give them thy fingers, me thy lips to kiss.
Measure for measure is referred to as the first of Shakespeare's problem comedies, a group of plays whose hard-edged and cynical tone is not conducive to happy endings. The central plot follows the old tale of a corrupt judge who propositions the sister of a defendant. In Measure for Measure, the corrupt character is Angelo, whom the Duke entrusts with the government of Vienna while he, the Duke, takes a sabbatical. In line with the Duke's direction, Angelo strictly enforces the law, making fornication a capital offence, but is happy to commit fornication himself when the opportunity presents itself in the form of Isabella, pleading with him to commute the death sentence passed on her brother Claudio for the same offence. Isabella threatens to publicise his proposition, but realises she will not be believed. Much of the intrigue in Measure for Measure arises from Shakespeare's recurring comedic device of disguise. The Duke, instead of leaving town, disguises himself as a friar in order to observe Angelo's actions, and soon finds himself impelled to intervene in his disguised role to deal with the consequences of those actions. The suggested solution to Isabella's dilemma involves another kind of disguise. Isabella tricking Angelo into sleeping with his ex-fiancée Mariana in the belief that she is actually Isabella. Still in his disguised role, the Duke intervenes again when he discovers that Angelo has reneged on his side of the bargain and arranges for Claudio to be spared while Angelo is deceived into thinking he's being executed. The web of deception set up in Acts 1 to 4 are resolved in Act 5. Isabella denounces Angelo for his corruption and is backed up by Mariana. When the Duke's disguise is revealed, Angelo realises that the truth is out and begs to be executed. However, when Mariana pleads for him and Claudio is revealed to be alive, Angelo is pardoned on condition that he married Mariana. The play closes with the Duke's proposition of marriage to Isabella, to which she has no opportunity to respond. The play's title comes from Matthew chapter 7, verse 2. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Some questions we had about the judgments made and the measures taken by the characters in the play included: was it right for Isabella to go along with the Duke's plan of Mariana sleeping with Angelo instead of Isabella herself? What was Mariana's motivation for her participation? Why did Angelo renege on his part of the bargain with Isabella and fail to pardon Claudio? What was the Duke's real motivation for leaving the city in Angelo's care, but continuing to observe and influence events in his disguised role of the friar? And finally, in asking Isabella to marry him, was the Duke not exploiting an unequal power relationship in a similar way to Angelo's exploitation of Isabella?
When in the chronicle of wasted time, I see descriptions of the fairest wights, and beauty making beautiful old rhyme in praise of ladies dead and lovely knights, then in the blazon of sweet beauty's best, of hand, of foot, of lip, of eye, of brow, I see their antique pen would have expressed even such a beauty as you master now. So all their praises are but prophecies of this our time, all you prefiguring. And for they looked, but with divining eyes, they had not skill enough your worth to sing. For we which now behold these present days have eyes to wonder, but lack tongues to praise.
Antony and Cleopatra. This play was registered in 1608, and it was probably written in 1607 between Macbeth and Coriolanus. Shakespeare took the plot from Plutarch's Lives which had been translated from Latin first into French and then in 1579 into English by Sir Thomas North. Shakespeare followed North's work so closely that his deviations from the original become very interesting. Almost one can see the dramatist at work. There are several places in the play where North's wording and Shakespeare's are identical, most famously in the Bard She Sat In speech. Shakespeare differs from North in one thing only here. Antony, left alone in the marketplace, is allowed to whistle. Some of the changes are to be expected when turning a prose life into a verse play. Time is compressed, actions appear to be simultaneous or contiguous, when in fact they are separated by months and even years, and characters are merged together for dramatic impact. Antony, for example, did have captains who deserted him, and he did have a captain called Enobarbus. But not only did he not desert, he survived Antony and went on to marry one of his daughters. North gives Shakespeare a lot of background information on Antony. His family, the Antonii, believed themselves descended from Anton, the son of Hercules, whom Mark Antony was thought to resemble. So we should see Antony as burly, bearded, crooked-nosed, and wearing his belt low slung on his hips with a scruffy cloak over all. His early life was misspent in feasting, drinking, and womanizing. He made Rome too hot to hold him and exiled himself to Athens to escape his creditors. Here he fell in love with Greece and all things Greek, learning the art of eloquence, the so-called Asiatic style of speech, full of hyperbole and ostentation. Antony's oration over Caesar's body in Julius Caesar shows off his command of rhetoric, but in this play it is Cleopatra, also of Greek extraction, who commands the Asiatic style to perfection. Antony does his best to keep up, but is most often seen as the plain soldier, a man without subtlety, as North says. He was indeed a model leader of men. His armies adored him because he led from the front and shared their hardships and then rewarded them generously. How old are the principal characters? North has Cleopatra aged 38 at her death, but is not sure how old Antony was, somewhere between 35 and 56. He must have been 45 or so because of his relationship with Octavius, who was 20 years his junior, the boy Caesar, whom at first Antony despises as neither soldierly nor sporting, but who puzzlingly comes to defeat Antony in everything from cockfighting to sea battles and to gain complete control of the Roman Empire. North is quite clear that the bane of Antony's life was his love for Cleopatra. She led him astray and in effect destroyed a fine man, wasting his talents in gross dereliction of duty. Shakespeare does not blank these things. From the opening line, we know that Antony is playing away, but we are allowed to judge for ourselves whether this be love indeed, and whether the world was well lost or not. North's Cleopatra is devious, untrustworthy, jealous, greedy, and incomparably attractive. What made her so remarkable? North says that she wasn't spectacularly beautiful, but that she had a physical presence, which he calls her excellent grace, which seems to have been innate. Antony calls her his serpent, which conveys the elegance and sinuosity of her movement, as well as the deviousness of her nature. Her other glory was her voice, which she'd cultivated, learning languages, practicing the art of speaking, and adapting these skills to her quicksilver mind. Slow of thought she was not. The problem is when to believe her. She was always a queen, and Egypt, perhaps, came first with her. North does not describe Cleopatra's death. He limits himself to the discovery of the body, robed and crowned, with Aras dead at the foot of the dais, and Charmian dying on her feet at the head. "Is this well done?" asks the guard. Shakespeare takes this and shows us how it all came about in one of the most remarkable scenes in the canon. I will finish by reminding you that this play comes between Macbeth and Coriolanus. Each of the three plays has a strong female role, grown women who have all had children. Shakespeare must have had an actor in mind to play these roles, an adolescent boy actor to whom he could give Cleopatra's lines about fearing to see some squeaking Cleopatra buoy her greatness in Caesar's triumph, and expect him to get away with it. As we read the play, think of the adolescent boys you know, and imagine what they would make of it.
My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damask red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, but I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground, and yet by heaven I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare.
The Merchant of Venice. Written between 1596 and 1597, the play is comedy and was one of Shakespeare's most popular plays. Interest in the Jews had been stirred up by the case of Rodrigo Lopez, a Portuguese Jew who, professing Christianity, had been physician to Queen Elizabeth I. Falling foul of the Earl of Essex, who accused him of trying to poison the Queen, he was executed for treason in 1594. There was a colony of Jews, the Jury, operating in Shakespeare's London. They adopted the guise of Christians but remained true to their faith. They lived apart and were forbidden, as were Christians, from lending money at excessive interest, usury. The degradation and impoverishment of the Jews in Europe was widespread, and in 1515 the Venetian state created the segregated Ghetto Nuevo, permitting Jews to do business by day but locked away by night, thus ensuring maximum economic advantage with minimum social contact. Shakespeare would have been aware of this. He enlarges, deepens, and transmits this factual knowledge to an image of a whole society where intolerance governs human behaviour. The merchant of the play's title is Antonio, who, unconsciously or consciously, loves the young Bassanio, a penniless charmer who borrows money from his friend to woo the wealthy heiress Portia. Bassanio asks to borrow the equivalent of £1.5 million, and this gives us an indication of the financial scale on which the play operates. For lack of ready cash, Antonio is driven to borrow money from Shylock, whom the merchant and his friends regard with contempt and disgust. The mutual antagonism of Antonio and Shylock, Gentile and Jew, native and exotic, merchant and usurer, is of long standing. For Shylock, Antonio represents unfair competition. He lends money gratis, lowering the rate of usury in Venice and impoverising Shylock's livelihood. The need to acquire and possess money is a major theme linking the characters, and it becomes a metaphor for profounder human exchanges. Venice was well known by the Elizabethans as Europe's greatest and oldest trading capital. It is a beautiful but dark world, full of money seekers who inhabit an insecure and insubstantial society riven with games and gossip, where both men and women feel the need to be loved, but experience loneliness and sadness. Antonio, Portia, and Jessica express this melancholy. Shylock embodies all of these ambiguities and paradoxes. For me, he is this tragic comedy's greatest achievement, the point at which Venetian society's rules and conventions turn into human experience. His very history stems from the play's hard Venetian logic. His desire for revenge has been bred by social ostracism accompanied by cruelty. The action of the play draws from Portia all her powerful grace and intelligence, from Antonio an absolute and sad generosity, and even from Bassanio some decency. Shylock remains constant and displays great courage as he calls Venetian society to account. There is a justice, but we may feel ambiguous as Shylock is drawn into that society by a compulsory conversion to Christianity and by having his wealth passed to his daughter, now married to a Christian. In The Merchant of Venice, we see Shakespeare's power to present confrontation from many viewpoints, leading us to ponder on the Christian behaviour of Venetian society and the stance of the outsider versus the state. Bigotry and bullying, all too familiar in our modern world.
Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that celebration as much as I did. Special thanks for the sonorous eloquence of the Shakespeare sonnet reciters Peter Davies, Janis, Giles and Alison Smerdon, and the perceptive insight of Shakespeare's play interpreter Anne Armitage, and to Susan Fraser, Dianne, Grebby, Robin Harris and Helen Zeitlin, who did both, reciting a sonnet and interpreting a play. All 9 of you are, in my view, Shakespearean heroes. Many thanks to the masterminds of Shakespeare's Birthday Celebration 2021, Dr. Peter Davies of Bath Shakespeare Society and Kiri Herbert of Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. So ends this Shakespeare birthday celebration. All's well that ends well.